What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Valley coming at you with another 2024-2025 NBA look ahead. We are on to the Dallas Mavericks, which means I get to speak with Kirk Henderson. He is the co-host of Pod Maverick. He also does lots and lots of stuff with Mavs Moneyball. Follow him on the Twitter machine, X machine, whatever, at Kirk Serious Face. That's at KarkSerious, excuse me, the link and handle and all that stuff. And as well to his podcast, Pod Maverick again. Love their post-game stuff. I'm not a big post-game guy when it comes to single teams. I like I'm more of a macro trends guy, but him and his co-host, I believe, Josh, they do a fantastic job. But Kirk with the post-game stuff specifically, I love listening to that and checking it out. Getting into a lot of stuff, Dallas Mavericks, excited for it. Hope you enjoy it. And as remember, if you're new around these parts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, please subscribe across all platforms. Ratings and reviews are great. They help us a ton on Spotify and Apple, by the way, 5 stars only. And if you've done all those things, tell people about us. Share the episodes on social media. Let people know. Help us continue to grow the community. You can also support us. Pick up some Hardwood Knocks. Sicko Mode Collection merch is now live. But that's enough out of me. Let's get to talking all things Dallas Mavericks with the one and only Kirk. Kirk, welcome back. Thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it to come on and talk some Mavs with me. How the heck are you doing, man?
I'm okay. It's very odd to be heading into a season like content because there's usually all these pain points with a middling team. But I've just enjoyed kind of the following after the Mavericks made the finals and just looking forward to what's ahead because they've had a solid offseason without much that a man like me can complain about.
That's awesome. And that's kind of where I want to start. I don't normally like rehashing what happened last season, but they remade themselves at the trade deadline. That sparks their finals run. What were just sort of your biggest takeaways or watching that, like, coming out of that, leading into this offseason and next season? Just what was something that like just kind of stood out about how much they did shift because of those moves that they made at the deadline?
Well, the moves were part of it, but it also came following the change in rule interpretation. And if we're honest with ourselves, the Mavericks played defense the way the Legion of Boom Seahawks used to play defense, where you can't call every foul. And the Mavericks were a rough and tumble, unbelievably physical defense for like the last 15 games of the season right into the playoffs. And that was really the thing which projected them to go as far as they did. Jason Kidd is I think he's a coach who is very aware of how long the season is, and he only knows he has so many buttons he can push. Mm-hmm. And the Mavericks have made I learned something that the Mavericks have made a move at every trade deadline for the past 7 years. So organizationally, they value mixing it up. And so I think, the two things came together in a confluence of events that allowed the Mavericks to get as far as they did last year in the playoffs.
Which, by the way, I was not a fan of their trade deadline at the time. So I got my comeuppance, very shortly after that with how well they performed.
It's like when you get a guy like PJ Tucker is just your consummate. Is he way too high on the totem pole, or is this franchise a disaster kind of move? Because I wasn't high on the move either. Not PJ Tucker, PJ Washington. And he just ended up really leaning into his role. He's got a great frame. He's 6'7" with a huge wingspan. And he played really well. And then the vertical athleticism of Daniel Gafford and just sort of the stereotypical junkyard dog mentality really gave Dallas something that they needed, because Dereck Lively is the future, but I think he needed someone to help carry the load. And that was really impressive the way it worked out.
So you look at what they've done this offseason, and it's been like, I don't want to say necessarily more stuff, but it was like a significant amount of stuff for a team that just made the finals. I feel like we don't see that much action from a team that's coming off a finals appearance. What did you think about, their entire offseason process, and even like factoring in not just the additions, but of course you do lose Derrick Jones Jr. as part of that too?
So it's fascinating. Derrick Jones Jr. was signed he was the 15th guy signed.
Yeah.
I remember where I was when it was happening, because I was driving to see my parents and I was in the middle of Oklahoma. And I'm like, well, a minimum deal. This guy opted out of a minimum deal to sign in Dallas. It's an upside play. And he played a little bit, but he really didn't settle into his role until the final half of the year. And while I do think the Mavericks are going to miss him, I think that he was definitely he was accentuated by playing with Luka. And I don't think he's going to be near as well utilized, though James Harden is very impressive out there with Los Angeles. But the offseason this year was interesting. Klay Thompson is, if anything, it just sort of shares a bit of a signal shift, because the Mavericks, he's got to be one of the biggest named free agents the Mavericks have ever signed. And while it does seem he signed largely out of a sense of spite, recent information indicates that Kyrie Irving played a pretty big part in his just in conversations with Klay Thompson, which I find very interesting because the Mavericks, they've had Dirk and they've had Luka, but they've never had a true recruiter. Just a cool guy. And Kyrie has sort of served that function. So you get a guy like him, you get Najee Marshall from the New Orleans Pelicans. And it's always interesting when a guy leaves one team and goes to another, you tend to see fans either really bag on the guy the way the Mavericks did with poor Tim Hardaway Jr., which drives me crazy because I kind of like Timmy. Or you see them kind of effusive with their praise. And Pelicans fans, by and large, were like, this guy you're going to like him. He's going to bring a no-nonsense attitude and a sense of physicality to defense that the Mavericks are really going to lean into. And then that doesn't even, address the Quentin Grimes situation. And I just am he replaces Tim Hardaway as the most handsome Maverick, which is incredibly important. The handsomeness power rankings is always important for a team. And I just think he's going to have a lot of opportunity. They moved on from Josh Green, which was a player who just wasn't my cup of tea. And yeah, so I just, so many things happens where I end up in a place where it's like, all right, this team I'm curious to see how they're going to be in the regular season, but in a 7-game playoff series, they're terrifying for most teams.
Yeah, it feels like you mentioned that Jason Kidd knows he has like a limited number of buttons to push in the regular season. It feels like just stylistically now, I love Najee Marshall. I think Quentin Grimes, his first 2 years in the league, he was hitting threes and defending his ass off. And so if he's healthy, I thought that was probably one of the more underrated. And to get him in the Tim Hardaway Jr. salary thing, I don't really understand what Detroit was necessarily thinking there. So right. I really like where they're at. But when you look at someone like Klay Thompson, what do you make of his overall fit? Like, do you think this signals maybe a shift of what some of the stuff the Mavs are going to do offensively? Do you at least trust that he'll buy into a more limited role? Because if you go back to what was happening in Golden State, like he had a pretty shitty shot selection towards the end of his time there. I felt like he was struggling to just adapt to his new role, the role they wanted him to play. Is that just easier by virtue of the ball dominance in Dallas from Luka and Kyrie, or just it being a new environment? Just what do you sort of make of that fit specifically?
Well, I think that the Mavericks needed another guy who could actively dribble. Dante Exum filled the role for parts of the year, but I just get the sense that Jason Kidd doesn't trust him. Klay Thompson can handle the ball and can pass the ball. And, there's Jared Dubin of Last Night in Basketball put together a really good compilation of Klay's passing to Golden State bigs. And with all due respect to Golden State bigs, they're not Dereck Lively. So I can't wait to see him in some pick and roll action and doing some different things. I think, I think the Mavericks are trying to do things that will get the ball out of Luka's hands in different playmakers' hands to where he just doesn't need to have a 36% usage rate, to where he can have a 32% usage rate. And we're talking 3 possessions a game. We're not talking about that much stuff, but I think that Klay will find a way to get his shots. One of the things that is woefully misunderstood about Luka from people who think he is a ball hog, they don't get that he wants to make the pass. He loves the highlight pass way more than the circus shot. And right now, if you're just talking about the Mavericks in a broad situation, if Klay's starting with Kyrie Irving, PJ Washington, Luka Doncic, Dereck Lively, the guy you have to sag off on right now is PJ Washington, who ended up punishing the Oklahoma City Thunder. And so it's and then they've only added more shooting here. So it's on paper, and particularly in a regular season game where teams aren't really scouting things to the nails, the Mavericks just are going to have the ability to score the ball a lot of different ways. And so I think Klay's shots will be there. It wouldn't shock me if he waxes and wanes. He's played a lot the last 2 years. I think the average fan doesn't really understand that he came back from that 2-year break, injury break, and ended up playing quite a lot of basketball. So he'll still play a lot this year. He'll have his opportunities. I'm a little worried about role stuff, but not because he's going to be a fourth banana, because I think he kind of already was. it's more of a how does Kid work with him, because I don't think Klay Thompson was responding to Kerr anymore, and I'm curious to see how that will work out.
I also do think that just being in like a new environment and having to be the new guy probably helps him. Where I've mentioned this before on this podcast anyway, that seeing Draymond Green and Steph Curry not really shrink in importance in Golden State when you came up with those guys, won 4 titles with those guys, was probably just like tougher to stomach and reconcile. So I feel like it'll be smoother. The one thing I would be curious though, and this isn't an insult to him. He's older. He's had those 2 major injuries. He's just not even close to what he was defensively. And so if we assume that he's going to start and at least play like starter level minutes or close to it, do you think when he's playing with Kyrie and Luka that the Mavs have enough defensively to insulate him and to optimize that lineup?
No.
Okay.
And that's where the kind of mad scientist element of a regular season comes into play, where we see what Kid tries. I think if you bank in for both Luka and Kyrie, both of them missing 15 games each, I think we'll see a lot of lineups where Klay Thompson is like the second best scorer on the floor, which does allow Dallas to play a Najee Marshall, a Quentin Grimes, and really try to basically patchwork the defense together. I do think they're going to have to, they're just going to have to ask Klay to guard more. And I'm going to be curious to see how, he really hasn't shown it the last 2 years, but the Warriors were also not very good. And there's elements of, for me, if the situation is different, and are the Mavericks able to cover different things with him schematically? I'm curious. Like he's not the defender that made him one of the 75 best players ever. Like that's something that Mavericks fans are going to have to come with. But one thing is true, he's still 6'7". And if you're putting out a line where Kyrie is the smallest guy, or even like say you exchange Kyrie with Grimes for periods, like the Mavericks have a big team. And
yeah, they're huge.
There's something to be said just for guys taking up space.
Yeah.
And, that's not obviously NBA level defense, but against, the 20 of the 30 NBA teams, you can sometimes get away with things like that.
You had mentioned that I just find it interesting, so I want to ask you about it, that maybe taking Luka off the ball a little bit more. You said not a lot, like a few possessions a game. What does it look like in those situations where a lot of the times now, if he's off the ball, kind of feels like, does he still just not kind of do anything? Is he chilling?
Well, this is a great question. I've been thinking about this a lot. So Adam Mares of DNVR went on Andrew Sharp's podcast. God, what is it? And he talked about how basketball on the NBA level is really a series of 3-man actions, 2-man actions, or 1-on-1. You're not really getting, full on 5-out like offenses where guys are moving all the time. Where the Mavericks have done is they just kind of plant Luka off ball and they let him stand there, and he's just let him just so he can rest. I personally, me as a basketball fan, I need him involved in the basketball sets without the ball, because that's what causes chaos. Like when Kyrie Irving sets Luka a screen, that freaks defenses out. So Luka needs to be setting a few more screens himself. Luka needs to be doing, the occasional, cut from the wing, like just different stuff to where you can make the defense panic a little bit more. And that's on him as much as anybody else, because I do understand, it's the middle of the third quarter, game 42, you're tired and you just want to take a couple of possessions off. But for the Mavericks to be the team that they need to be, or that they're trying to be and aspiring to be, they have to win 55 regular season games, which means Luka doing some stuff that he probably isn't super thrilled about, but that's what being the best player on your team means. And so I hope he does play off ball more.
A lot of the reason, to get back to Quentin Grimes for a second, that I was okay with them losing Dereck Jones Jr. is because you bring in someone like Quentin Grimes and you have that guy who can defend like probably close to 1 through 3, but can definitely handle just like, the other team's smaller advantage creator. But I was just wondering, like, do the Mavs view him the same way? Like, is he coming in with sort of like, well, we're going to give you this role? Or are we going to see like, maybe they will go to Dante Exum a little bit more, or Jaden Hardy or Spencer Dinwiddie?
It's so fascinating, because then you get into sort of the GM side of this, where you have Jaden Hardy, Quentin Grimes, and Dante Exum all essentially on the last year of their deals, 1 year each. And so each guy has a real incentive to do their absolute best and earn something. I mean, I know Grimes, I think, is last year and he could be a restricted free agent, but it's, it's when you make money, making money in the NBA is important to these guys. It's why they're playing professional basketball. So I'm not sure how they view Grimes because if anything, I think they have too many choices. And they might, when you look at the roster, I could see Kid playing as many as 11 guys some nights pretty regularly, which is weird. I mean, I know you don't get down to playoff rosters till you get 7, 8 at most, but they just have some optionality there, and I find that interesting.
Yeah, they do, and 11 guys is sort of wild to just have, even during the regular season, that you think deserve minutes. Dereck Lively, favorite around these parts. What stood out or most impressed you about what he did as a rookie in Dallas?
Well, I need to have a bit of a mea culpa because on last year's podcast, I was like, we're not here to talk about Dereck Lively. We're here to talk about Olivier Maxence-Prosper. And I was wrong. Lively is like an ever-evolving Pokemon, and I have no idea what his final form is going to be, but everyone should be very, very afraid. He is so big because he's 7'2" and 240. Like he outweighs Chet Holmgren by 25 pounds, and that matters over the course of the series. In particular, you just wear a guy out. His evolution as to someone who could, because he couldn't set screens at Summer League in 2023. He comes in, he plays almost immediately. He doesn't have the foul trouble I would have expected. He had a little bit of, he still only played 20-ish minutes a game, but he was so wildly impactful. And I don't know if you remember. I think it was against the Celtics, the one game the Mavericks won where he hit a corner three off like a wild play. And everyone was freaking out. It's like, this is the future. The Mavericks are basically saying he will never shoot threes for them. But I love watching him operate like a 7'2" Draymond Green. That is what I think his ultimate psychotic, unbelievable ceiling could be if he were to ever reach it. He is so smart on offense and so capable on defense. I just couldn't have picked a better player to play with Luka Doncic. He's amazing.
Is there anything specifically, an area of development or whatever, that you're just tracking or monitoring most closely, like throughout year 2? And are we just assuming he'll start now? Like that it's not going to be
so. Yeah. I think the starting is there, but I also think that he's such a team player to where he is willing to sort of do what's best. In terms of areas of improvement, I think it honestly depends on how teams guard Luka.
Okay.
Coming out of the All-Star break last year, the Mavericks lost like 6 of 7. Like I was calling for Kid's head. We were all super pissed. What teams were doing during that time was saying, we are not leaving Luka. We're not sending any help at Luka. Whoever is guarding Luka is going to be on an island. Luka's going to have to score blah, blah, blah points in order for the Mavericks to win. And they just kept coming up short. It's very similar to how the Celtics guarded them in the finals, but they were much better designed as a team for it. I think Luka likes being double teamed. And when Luka likes being double teamed, he likes finding the roll man. And if Luka gets doubled a lot, Lively and operating out of that short roll is the thing that I am most excited to watch, because against the Thunder, he had a couple of plays where you could see the light starting to turn on, where he realized that, yes, I am 7'2" and can take one power dribble and finish with either hand, because he's that kind of finisher. He's really skilled with both hands. Or I can roll and find somebody cutting to the short corner for a dunk, or hit somebody in the corner for a three. He's really that kind of guy. So I'm very interested to see how he plays as sort of a secondary playmaker, given how pick and roll heavy the Mavericks are.
And last year, it sort of seemed like, after the trade deadline, of course, that there was either, I don't say like a dead even minute split, because I know Lively, I think he averaged under 20 minutes per game when he came back from that injury, like before the regular season was out. Like, how did we see the secondary big man rotation working this year? Is it like we're going to heavily skew it towards Lively's minutes, or could there be more of a dead even split? Or even are we still trying to make a Maxi Kleba happen as a primary big? Do you maybe get weird for a few minutes a game? Not weird, but do you put PJ at the 5 for a couple of minutes, or is it just like, oh, go ahead.
I really hope they get weird and try different stuff, but I bet they still go for sort of a 50-50 split.
Okay.
Because you know how coaches get when guys get that third foul or even that second foul, they get a little skittish and they immediately go to their bench guy. And when you're very confident in your bench guy, you don't really hate that as a fan of a given team, because it's just, you never know what you're going to get out of those guys. I bet they And if they're drawing up their minutes blocks and you got, what is it? So it's 48 minutes times 5, like however many, you got 48 center minutes. I bet you probably try to go for 28 for Lively and 20 for the other center. But then, they do have Maxi Kleba, who is an odd big. That guy, if he plays 10 minutes a game for the Mavericks, I think they're in good shape. He's a really helpful, he's a really good help defender, but not a great rim protector. I do hope they do some funky stuff with their sizing and play PJ at the 5 sometimes, just because why not? Like, let's see what you have in terms of both offense and defense. But that's what should happen, at least on paper.
I missed on the Daniel Gafford acquisition in the sense of some of my concerns came to bear in the playoffs, but I need to place better weight in as a regular season, like high end minutes eater, excuse me. Like that is a dude that just flat out works. And like you mentioned, like sort of the vertical athleticism is huge for them. And so that was just, he really impressed me with that. And like having him for a full year, that I feel like at least makes life a lot easier on Lively in the sense that you're even saying the plan shouldn't be, you don't need him to play 30 minutes a game is my point, because you have someone who's as good as Daniel Gafford, and maybe he's more likely to run into matchup issues, but that's just another thing that you don't need to care about as often in the regular season.
Yep. And that's what I'm sort of hoping for too, because Lively also seems to have a penchant for odd injuries. Sometimes that just happens. Like I would argue Kyrie Irving is one of those guys where it's like you don't want to call him injury prone, but weird stuff seems to happen. Like Lively getting, it felt like if Lively were 30 instead of 20, I think Karl Towns might have ended his career with that knee to the back of the head. But instead, because he's like a 20-year-old made out of beef jerky, he just like stands up, shakes it off, and is back in the next game. It's like, okay, sure. So I don't know, but it's having a solid series of bigs is such an odd place for me to be as a Mavericks fan, because I've endured has-beens or truly awful centers for such a long time, where it's like, Mark let Tyson Chandler go after 1 year. And so to get a guy who feels like an evolutionary version of Tyson is really fun.
PJ Washington is fascinating to me. It feels like what is your level of trust just in the role that they're going to want him to assume? Like, do you trust him more to be like, the best non-big defender, or do you trust more of what they need from him on offense, which is, and we saw he kind of was all over the place at points. Like he was hitting his threes, he was missing his threes. Can he be someone who attacks closeouts? Can he be someone that punishes mismatches? What is your level of trust in him consistently filling that, like, I guess the different spots that the Mavericks need him to fill?
Like, if the Mavericks have a weakness, this is the one, because he's a 4 that they occasionally want to masquerade as a 3. And I'm not sure he's that great at it. And he's why I am high on him is because he's such a bundle of attributes, but things wax and wane with him in a real way. I made the joke repeatedly after they got him that he needed LASIK, because when he misses shots, it's like, is there a breeze in the building? Like, what were you looking at, my guy? And then against the Celtics, it really came out against the Celtics, which maybe isn't fair, but it's a criticism that exists. He has a terrible handle. And with the way the Mavericks play, if you're going to be a release valve, you have to be confident in putting the ball on the floor. You just have to be. And that's, where, the Mavericks have an assistant coach in God Shamgod, where you hope that he just sort of put him through Shamgod camp for the summer, and he comes out with just a slightly better, just a slightly better handle, because he's got a really interesting package. He's got an odd floater game that really works from like that 5 to 9 foot range, where it's like, how did that ugly thing go in? But the 3-point shot comes and goes in such wild swings. At the moment, I don't particularly trust him, but it's a level. It's like, I don't trust him compared to Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic, and Klay Thompson. Like, it's kind of a luxury, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it sounds like I was overweighting it, because I didn't look at Klay necessarily as the guy to kind of fill in the spot of, the third guy in the primary lineup who can dribble or like attack in those situations. And I viewed it more as like PJ Washington, I feel like needs to be that guy, because it feels like he'll be working with more space, but it does sound like you might be higher on Klay Thompson being able to fill in those gaps.
Yes. I mean, I think I'm just still, instead of being so worried coming into the season about different elements where they're short, because the Mavericks in 2022-23 looked so dead in the water. and then they just came back and so I'm still just sort of living on a high, and I've not yet written down all of my like concern points, and that'll happen soon enough though, because I guess the season is sneaking up on us.
Well, I think what's also big too is like to me, they at least feel better from a talent perspective, where I don't think they compromised their defense, but I think they got a lot more versatile on offense, even if the third ball handler, third attacker is still like, it was a concern they were working with last year, and they went pretty far as it turns out.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it requires a little bit of luck. Someone asked me a very upsetting question on a mailbag pod the other day, where it's like, what do you think about Jaden Hardy in comparison to Rodrigue Beaubois, former Mavericks, almost legend, and this guy named Dominic Jones, who played with the team for like, he was on the title team, but like never played, like one of these combo guards. And it's just like, my answer was, it's so great to not really have to care at all. Because it's like, if you're getting that deep into the roster to where somebody like Jaden Hardy matters, you're talking about a different team. And like a guy like Jaden Hardy, he was a difference maker in the playoffs in a way that I will never be able to properly contextualize. He threw up some garbage that went in at the right time for the Mavericks, and all you can do is go, okay, I'll take it, and then hope it comes back the next year. But it's just, they're just in a bizarre spot that I am, where I feel very bullish on my team.
And I think you're rightfully bullish on them. Where are you sort of at though with Jaden Hardy, who, by the way, you mentioned the playoffs, and it felt like he kind of like manifested out of nowhere at a point like deep in the postseason, where this guy wasn't getting regular minutes, and then if it's all of a sudden, what's that first game? He comes in, he plays like, what was it, 15 minutes or something against Oklahoma City, and it was like, what is going on here?
So I go to summer league. I've gone to summer league every year for 11 years in a row. I have never won money gambling for fun at any point. Like, I walked out down for 10 straight years. This year, I actually walked out a little bit up. I'm going to use that as a comparison to Jaden Hardy, because he was down for 2 years with the Mavericks, where he was a mess. Players, because he's 6'3" combo guard. I don't want to say he got hot at the right time, because he didn't really shoot that, but it's just his irrational confidence was a thing that the team needed at specific points where things were sort of wavering. And it's crazy to me that it ended up working. Like, he is such a peculiar player where he's still developing. He's young, but small. Like, let's just be honest. Every year there's 6'3" combo guards coming into the league that can kind of shoot, can kind of pass. So for my expectations for somebody like him this year are very similar to Grimes and Exum, where you hope that when the Mavericks call on him for a 15, for 2 15-game stretches during an 82-game season, that he's able to produce in a way that helps them win ball games.
Is that seems like it could just be sort of a vacillation point for their roster, where it's like on any given night, it could be a Jaden Hardy night or a Quentin Grimes night or an Exum night type deal, where it's not going to be, this one guy of those three is penciled in as he's going to play X amount of minutes.
I think that's right. And I think that's often the case with potential contenders, because the season's just too long to have 7, the Celtics might be an exception, but the season's just too long to have 8 guys that can consistently play above average to great basketball for 70 plus games. It's just too, like, they're injuries, life, slumps, it's things just happen sometimes to where guys play really frustrating basketball. And instead of and the Mavericks now have optionality where instead of playing, if Dereck Jones Jr. hit a slump last year, they played him through it because they didn't really have the other options. Whereas now they got 3 to 4 guys, I think, that can sort of slide in at different points and give them at least opportunities. They might not play better, but it's nice to have opportunities instead of saying, okay, well, we're going to go, the Mavericks had this thing after they were in the bubble where they re-signed like Willie Cauley-Stein to a deal. And it's like, who's offering Willie Cauley-Stein money? Like, what are we doing? They just have a roster now that feels as complete as it could be given the current salary cap structure.
One of the things that was fascinating, or that I thought was really cool about them, is they played so much faster than they have in seasons prior. They were 30th in average offensive possession time in 22-23. They were like, I had it written down here, I think it was it 7th or 5th? Like, it was 8th. They shot up to last year. There was clear when you watched them, like, I think an emphasis on making quicker decisions off of grabbing defensive rebounds. But was there anything else that went into that? Is that simply just a mindset shift? And are they still built to continue that trend, because I thought it gave them, we talked a lot about optionality here. They have the ability to play in so many different ways to me too, because I think we saw them slow things down a little bit when it was actively the, Kyrie by himself or Luka by himself, when defenses were like not as stretched thin because they're not focusing on 2 stars. They're focusing on 1.
They need to play fast. I think that given the horses and given the variation of guys, I think that it works best for everyone if they're willing to play fast. I said, and I just finished saying they need to. I just think there just has to be a willingness involved, where Luka just really likes maestroing and controlling everything from the go. But now I think he has confidence in the guys that he's passing ahead to. You got Kyrie streaking on the wing. You got Klay Thompson. You got Dereck Lively. Like, as the season went on last year, he tried lots of preposterous stuff. The Mavericks in the playoffs had they had more dunks than any team since like the 01 Lakers or something. It was nuts. And it comes from their sort of willingness to really press when they have the advantage. And so hopefully it's built into the strategy. I think it's pretty important for them.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious to see, because Klay can still move, but I'm just wondering if having him at times, or even, I guess Najee March is actually pretty good in transition. I was going to say instead of Derrick Jones Jr., if that changes anything.
That I'm going to miss. I asked a Mavericks official this, and he said, we never really ran any plays for Derrick Jones. Like, he just kind of got those dunks, but those dunks are it's like when you see a team get hot in baseball, all of a sudden it just takes the one thing. And I think there's an emotional element to the Mavericks playing with athletic guys and getting those dunks that they need to find a way to keep trying to manufacture. Josh Green, who was maligned by me and by others, he was another spark plug. Like, other guys are going to have to step into those roles and fill them in some way, shape, or form.
I have to ask about this just because you sold me Omax real estate on a podcast last year. Where are you? I haven't sold yet. That's any consolation, but where are you at with Olivier Maxence-Prosper?
I'm glad they don't need him.
Mm.
I don't, after seeing him in Summer League this year, not really look any different. I have concerns. One thing that I don't think is not talked about enough, and I guess it is to a degree, like the G League Ignite sort of went up in flames as a developmental structure for the NBA. And I don't think we're talking about why enough, because G League basketball is not really remotely similar to NBA basketball. Like, it's such a faster pace. So it's like I was watching, Omax stuff in the G League, and he puts up really nice stats, and then he comes to the NBA, and it's not like I expect him to get 30 points, but there are just times when he looks really lost. One of the things that he had coming into the league, which he was very good at college, is like he seemed to be a guy where he's almost like a shutdown corner, where you put him on someone and he can definitely keep that guy from scoring, but he's not a great team defender. And so I'm worried insofar as I can be about a team, again, that just came off the finals. I hope he gets his opportunities. But when I mentioned, the Mavericks potentially playing, 9, 10, 11 guys, when you go down the list, you start to look and you're like, all right, who's going to be one of the odd men out? And I think right now, given the team's structure, he is going to be one of the odd guys out who just doesn't get many chances.
What's also tough with someone like him, and maybe I'm just showing my ignorance to what goes on in the G League, is that it's hard to just replicate, if he's getting that time, what he would do with this basketball team, because he's either going to be playing with less talented players who can't really put him in the situations he would be in, or you're just going to give him a ton of volume on the ball, which he's just never going to get with the actual Mavericks.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem, where it's not that he is perfectly, if you assume the NBA is 450 of the best players in the world, and there's about 1,000 guys worldwide that could probably play minutes in the NBA, you get some of these guys that are younger or better, and they just don't really get a chance to show what they could do because the situation isn't right for them. And he might be one of those guys, but he's also he's big. He's like 6'8". He's got great shoulders. He's got the I don't want to say like the measurables, because he really didn't have that great combine testing, but like there's something there where you look at the guy and go, I think someone can make that guy a basketball player. And so maybe they'll get the opportunity. I'm not really sure where he would fit with them at the moment, but it's another large, rangy guy. So I'm hopeful for him, but not bullish this year.
Are you ready to enter the cookie cutter portion of the podcast?
Yes.
Is there a strength or just something about this team that you think flies under the radar and needs to be talked about more?
Ooh, a strength that needs to be talked about more. After a finals run, I don't think so. My co-host and I were just talking about how we have to sort of be ready and be on our game early when the season starts because the Mavericks are going to have more eyes. Whereas when they started last year, I mean, they had tanked to miss, the 10th seed. They were going to miss it anyways. But it's like they just had such bad vibes coming into the year in 2023, 24. And nobody really noticed that they were very good because they got off to an 8-2 start and then effectively played under 500 basketball until the All-Star game. Like Luka had that 70-point game, which I really wish people talked about more because he was that was one of the silliest things I've seen. And it's that they said it's like the rule changes came pretty soon after that, but like he shot like 9 of 15 from 3. Like that's why he scored 70 points. Anyway, I don't really think that there's too much that's flying under the radar about this team this much. Their head coach or their associate head coach Sean Sweeney nearly getting hired by Detroit is probably like secretly one of the big wins for the Mavericks because I think he is like the Thibodeau to Doc Rivers Celtics team where he really helped assemble the defense. And so if there's a defensive upside for this team, it's because I believe he might be able to shape it.
Do you prefer, by the way, this is totally off topic, but do you prefer your own peace of mind? You feel good about this team. That's much easier to do. Do you prefer that like they're kind of forefront in the national conscious for all basketball reasons now? Like, or does that get like, are you one of the people that might feel better if people were doubting your team inherently?
I mean, it's nice. And it really depends on how you like to consume sports, where you get the kind of fans that are like, oh, nobody's talking about our team. That's annoying. And then you get then when people are talking about your team, they're not talking about our team correctly.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you want? There's such a smorgasbord of content where you can kind of find the content that you want. And like, I like it so long as the team is interesting. I'm sure you've had to cover some very bad teams over the years. And like, when the team is not good, by around game 40, there's nothing more to say. And you have 40 more games to get to. And so I'm at least pleased that everything is interesting to where I have like, look, we're at the 38-minute mark already. Like there's stuff to talk about with this team, which is fun.
I also like too that it feels like there's different. I mean, you talk about everything when you cover them for all 82 games, but from a national perspective, when it feels like even looking at other national outlets covering them, it feels like there's variable talking points now as opposed to what was it, 2 or 3 years of like the Luka Doncic contract situation and his future. And now the focus is kind of shifted towards. I'm not one of those that it needs to be on basketball all the time, but there's so many different intriguing things about this team beyond like, well, what's going to happen transactionally with them?
Yeah, and that's fun because if you move past kind of the headliner aspect of, oh, is Klay Thompson gonna like playing in such a Luka heavy scheme? The questions of what can you do with Klay Thompson on offense with these different players is really fun to think about. Like basketball is such a game of margins and really tiny ones. And this team is so interesting from a basketball point of view, and that's what's nice. I'm lucky to work with on my Mavs podcast. My co-host is he's like one of these guys that can watch a play and see it one time and being able to explain every element. And so I can't wait till once the season is going to be able to say, all right, this is the elevator play they ran for Klay Thompson. Oh man, look how he gets this pick and roll and the dunk and an easy dunk for Daniel Gafford like that. I can't wait for that stuff.
Is there, and I know last year when I asked you this question, it might still be the same answer, but when you're looking at this roster, what's the biggest concern you have about it?
To use an overused phrase, I'm sort of wondering who's the point of attack defender. Like who do they put in that role? But I think they have some interesting options, like you've mentioned before, Quentin Grimes. I suspect Najee Marshall and PJ Washington all get cracks at it, depending on who the player is.
Najee's good at like those. Like when you're putting him up against someone who's like has like that on-ball burst, but like the guys who have changes of speed, like he did some pretty good stuff against Shea, I thought, when he played against him. So like I don't think people are considering him or Quentin Grimes enough when they talk about what the Mavs potentially lost in Derrick Jones Jr.
Yep. And then it's going to be fun to see how they get those things to work. I mean, we get so critical of NBA players because you see so many games of them, but like when you really boil it down, particularly guys that are still within their prime, they're so incredible with the range of things they can do. And so it's like for guys that I'm not as familiar with, meaning Marshall and Grimes, I just can't wait to learn about them and learn about what their strengths are within this Dallas team. So that's going to be fun.
You'll have to let me know if Grimes is still unhappy about not working with the ball in his hands, though. That'll be something that you'll need to track for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was a weird thing he had in New York. He didn't really play in Detroit, so it didn't matter. But I thought that was one of the more bizarre things that I saw. So you mentioned there's 11 guys who you think need to play. I'm going to ask you though. Everyone's healthy. Who are the top 10? Like, what's that 10-man rotation look like?
Oh, I'm pulling up the roster now, and I'm pulling up because you gave us a nice little rundown, and so it's your starters are self-evident to me. Where you have Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Klay Thompson, PJ Washington, Dereck Lively. That's your 5. The first guy off the bench, or the first big off the bench, is the aforementioned Daniel Gafford. He's obviously fantastic. Now after that, you get a lot of question of feel of who's going to be the next guy. To me, my initial inclination, given sort of what they've talked about, has to be Najee Marshall. But again, it's how they structure Kyrie's minutes, Luka's minutes is so interesting because you just have different guys that can do different things. So it's, is it going to be Dante Exum that comes off? Is it going to be Quentin Grimes? You wrote down Maxi Kleber as their 10th on top of that, but then that's where you start to really get into these different looks at things where you have Olivier Maxence-Prosper, who we talked about a few seconds ago. You have Jaden Hardy. Is that guy going to be someone that matters? Then there's we didn't even talk about him. There's Spencer Dinwiddie. Dinwiddie exists. And I personally can't believe they brought him back because they sent him out, and I am very certain they were tired of his. He's like the colleague who, when things are going great, you love having him around, but when things aren't, it's like, dude, shut up. That's Spencer Dinwiddie. He was giving 2 and 3 minute answers to stuff before they traded him about what the team needed to do better while he was shooting like ass. And it's like, buddy, read the room. You're not that guy. Don't do it. But yeah, it's going to be really fascinating. Man, I can't believe I forgot about Dinwiddie. That's just that's what I mean when I say they have 12, 12ish guys. So it's going to be, I don't want to say it's going to be interesting. It'll probably be stressful. There's probably going to be some definite narrative structure that will come out of that, depending on who's happy or unhappy. But winning cures all, and hopefully the team that just got to the finals has that taste to where they can put aside things and try to get there again.
It does show a level of belief in Jason Kidd or just what you're doing organizationally, that they weren't worried about putting a club in Jason Kidd's or the team's bag that they might lean on too much and you don't want them to where it's like, okay, you have Quentin Grimes and Jaden Hardy. You might become too reliant on Spencer Dinwiddie. He's not what you need just because he's the quote unquote veteran, but to have him there, it seems like that's just, no, we know what we're doing. We're just going to, I've been using the hashtag try shit for a bunch of different teams throughout this series. It seems like they're willing to experiment based off some of the stuff they did last year too. So I'm fascinated by their depth because I think they have a lot of good things to figure out, but it's still stuff to figure out.
Yep.
So obviously, and I think with this team, it could be even more so. The crunch time lineups will be matchup dependent, but if you had to guess, what do you think ends up being their most used or most relied upon crunch time unit?
This is where the narratives are going to come from. Klay was obviously very pissed that he was not in closing lineups. And I just think it's got to be really, really variable because if you were wanting to throw out a defensive lineup for this team, let's say you were trying to run out the clock, Mavericks are up by 15, you got 4.5 minutes left. You could theoretically run a lineup with Luka, Najee Marshall, Quentin Grimes, Maxi Kleber, and Dereck Lively. And Luka, I have belief that he's going to come into the season as a better defender. Luka with those 4 guys behind him, that's a tough team. It's a tougher team to score on than the starters that we talked about that have some turnstiles on there. So I think it's going to be very matchup dependent and very situational. And that's where Jason Kidd has his work really, really, really cut out for him. And that's probably if there's something that I'm not looking forward to, it's that sort of stuff, because you would hope that winning trumps all, but at the same time, guys want to finish games and they want to start games. It's maddening.
Yeah. Is there I still kind of view it and maybe you feel differently about PJ Washington or the big. It does feel like there might be 4 locks for crunch time when you look at Lively, Washington, Luka, and Kyrie. And I view that Klay spot whether it's Najee Marshall or if you want to go with, I don't know why you would want maybe Quentin Grimes in certain areas. Is that the spot, or could you see them futzing and fiddling elsewhere, whether it's with the Washington spot? Will there be some matchups where maybe they're not closing with the traditional big?
I think the futzing with the Washington spot is going to be the sort of sneaky angle of all this. I do think you're right about the 3, the Klay Thompson starting spot is going to be the one that's pretty obvious, but I do think the PJ Washington part of this is going to be interesting too.
Is there a weird, offbeat, or funky lineup you would like to see them try this season?
Ooh. I do love that. So you mentioned Washington at the 5, and I would love them to put an uber small lineup where Luka's the 4, where he doesn't need to touch the ball, where you get Kyrie actually running point and something like where Luka is essentially, because he has the size of a 1980s power forward. Why not just put him down there or put him in a little bit of a different spot and see what happens. I just have always sort of loved the idea of Luka at the 4 or the 5 now and then. They've tried it a few times and it's been really fun. But it's just when you get traditional bigs that are actually functional, it's hard to not play them. So I doubt they'll do anything that Kidd's not Rick Carlisle. Rick Carlisle would he's just what's the weirdest shit imaginable I can do and still get a win? That's the Rick mindset. And it's not Kidd.
I want to see them go ultra jumbo sized, where it's you have Lively and Luka and Washington, then give me Najee. And I understand that Klay 6'7", but this is supposed to be a funky lineup. Let's just throw Max and Klebe out there, and we'll use him, Washington, and Lively as the front line, and we can kind of see what happens. I don't know what that necessarily looks like, but is Luka the shortest player in that lineup at that point?
Maybe.
So
I love crap like that. It's it's so funny when you see. It's hard to tell on TV, I think, because it's just you get used to it. But then if you're ever in a game in person, the way that they find the guys take up so much space on the floor, it's I'm almost shocked that they're able to get shots off. And a team like that would be hilarious to watch score against.
Before we get to their win total place in the West, is there anyone that we haven't discussed that you would like to touch upon?
No, I think we're pretty good. Covered a lot of bases here.
So their win total as we record this is set at 49.5. Are you taking the over-under on that? And where do you kind of what are your expectations for? They're in a weird spot because they're near the top of the West. What are your expectations for? Is it top 4 that you're hoping to get?
I'm assuming the Thunder are at the top. What's their win total?
Let me see. I do not have it pulled up. I think they were in the mid 50s, if I was not mistaken, though. So they are at Oklahoma City has 56.5. Yeah. I think that might actually be, I think I saw them at 57.5.
That's and that's got to be frightening for a betting point of view, but they're so stinking good. I expect them to win 62. They're just, and so, I would place an over bet on that 49.5 because the Mavericks won 50 last year. Exactly. They're 50-32. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. All this stuff.
No, you were right, and that was with whatever the hell was happening before they remade the roster.
Right. This is the dirty secret is Jason Kidd's record in October, November, March, and April is so much better with the Mavericks than the other 3 months, than November, December, January, in February. It drives me crazy. Anyway, I would place an over bet because I think that the Mavericks, if there's a goal to be had for them, it is home court in the playoffs. They have technically had home court one time in the Luka Doncic era, and it was actually against the Utah Jazz when he was hurt and they lost game one anyways. They have won game one in a Jason Kidd's playoff thing one time. And Jason Kidd, believe it or not, already has more playoff series wins than Rick Carlisle.
Oh, wow.
Who won a championship. So that's just sort of a reminder of how hard it actually is to get out of the first round in the NBA, because it's just, it's one and done. You're done. And so I think the Mavericks need to establish home court. I think they need to win about 55 games. And I think they need to be fighting for a. I don't think anybody's touching the Thunder. I think they need to be fighting for that 2-3 spot.
This is the first one. I've done about a dozen of these so far. The 49.5 feels low. I've looked at all these other numbers and been like, all right, like that makes sense. 49.5 feels really low for Dallas.
It absolutely, to me, it is, because if you win 50 and you make the finals and you see sort of a framework of a team that ought to be pretty good, I would have assumed like 52.5, something like that really makes you, because I think they hit that over easily. And not to be a homer in this instance, it's like they've, with Luka Doncic healthy and Jason Kidd at the helm, they've won 50 or more games twice, and then made the conference finals, the NBA finals. And maybe there's something there playing into the history of the record. The fact that Jason Kidd doesn't really have a very good regular season record. Maybe that's part of it.
Is there any team though, like at the top of the West or in the West, that you find as like either the toughest or most fascinating matchup in a prospective series, or even just on a regular season where you want to see how?
Be Denver. It's a styles make fights things, because Luka. If you consider the Mavericks sort of a Luka heavy offense, and then you're playing against the Nuggets, who are very much the ball is popping, and the fact that the Mavericks, Nikola Jokic to me is the best player in the world by a margin. I think Luka is in that mix with Giannis and Embiid if you're a sociopath, and just like really, and there's a distant second, and so I think that the Nuggets also to me don't have the depth.
No, they don't have the shooting either.
Right. Well, Michael Porter Jr. is, I've feared him since high school in terms of being a scorer, because it's like when that guy finds his green light, there's no stopping him. And he shot awful in the playoffs last year for them, and was, I think, kind of a secret reason outside of Jamal Murray being injured and fat as to why they lost. So it's like, if those two things are right, because you remember, one of the great regular season matchups was the Nuggets versus the Mavericks, where Kyrie scored that last second garbage lefty floater over Jokic. The two teams just play really, it's just two different brands of basketball. And I think that would be a really fun series, but other than the Oklahoma City Thunder, which to me now essentially don't have weaknesses, the Nuggets are the team that I think give the Mavericks the most run for their money.
I am interested in the Thunder matchup with Isaiah Hartenstein, though. I don't know if it really pays to go dual big against Dallas, like when PJ Washington is their quote unquote second big. But I do think Hartenstein makes that matchup between OKC and Dallas a lot more interesting.
Just fun. Like Hartenstein and because I don't know if you remember this one play, but like they were trying to intentionally foul Lively, and Lively was just outrunning.
No, I don't remember that.
I'll see if I can send it to you offline, but it really made me laugh, where it's like he is outrunning Chet. Like it looks like they're playing a game of tag, and Hartenstein is just such an energy monster. Like the guy, like he was a guy that I always wanted the Mavericks to get, and they just couldn't make the money work. And it's like he signed one of the biggest free agent contracts in Oklahoma City, so it's in history for them. So they're just going to be a really fun team to watch, and I cannot believe they got Caruso. Caruso is a guy that I got in 2019. So the 2019 offseason for the Mavericks, which is the year they got they got Porzingis from the net. Like they had a deal in place to bring Caruso in, and Cuban went back on it, and they signed Boban instead. And like, it's one of those like sliding doors moments with me, because I think Caruso would have been the kind of guard to help take the Mavericks places. Because he's just such a utility guard. He does everything. Yeah. I mean, you want him to shoot more. Anyway, this is supposed to be a Mavericks.
He's somehow been undervalued by each of his two teams. When you look at the Lakers letting him walk, and then whatever the hell Chicago just did. But not a Bulls podcast. Kirk, this was great, as always. Are you just able to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
So earlier in the show, I briefly forgot the name of my own podcast when I said a Mavericks podcast. That's because it's called Pod Maverick. And then our website is mavsmoneyball.com. I just got done bringing on 9 new volunteers. So I'm looking forward to see what things are written about the Mavericks in the coming weeks and months. And it's certainly going to be an exciting and weird basketball season. I can't wait.
Make sure to subscribe to Pod Maverick. The link will be in the podcast and YouTube description. Kirk, as you know by now, I'll be pestering you again down the line. And thank you so much for your time.
Have a good day, man.